Thank you for joining us on Coffee with Cornelius. If you enjoy this kind of content, if you enjoy what we're doing, hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more. I'm very happy to be joined today by Derek Sloan. Derek Sloan is in the Conservative leadership race, and he is a member of Parliament currently, sitting in Ontario. You're running on a platform that is socially conservative. And I'd like to, first of all, figure out how you differ and how you are unique from your opponents, namely Aaron O'Toole, Peter MacKay, and so on. So I'd like to start with your political philosophy. What does conservatism mean for you? What's your vision? What does conservatism mean to you?
Yeah, so I like to draw on sort of the best sort of strains of conservative thought. And again, I'm not a philosopher per se. I'm a small business owner. I'm a lawyer by nature. So I like to look at things that work. So I don't sit up I don't sit up in an ivory tower, so to speak, and say this is the best ideology. Reality must conform to this ideology. But if I could just talk about themes that sort of reflect on my values, I trust individuals and small business more than I do bureaucratic organizations, more than I do international corporate interests. I believe that an ideal economy is one that is primarily local, that involves people owning their own property, owning their own tools of the trade, having the ability to make to draw on a concept from the Bible. They all have their own tool under their own tree, so to speak, or the Jeffersonian myth of the farmer. You know what I mean? Everyone has their own little plot of land. They're able to provide for themselves. They're able to participate in the economy without being dictated to or without being beholden to anybody. So that's kind of my ideal is small business, entrepreneurship, and obviously, there's always going to be big companies, there's always going to be government, but the ideal approach to me is individuals who are free to have their own views, or free to espouse ideas, free to invent new things, live in an environment, in an economy where they have the ability to do that. You take a look at some of the greatest inventions we've ever seen, did not come from, international corporation ABC. They came from Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, the latter more than the former, but Bill Gates, people like this who had the ability, the free time to just tinker in their garages. And, we live in an environment right now where housing costs are through the roof, tax rates are really high, and people have to get a corporate job. Both parents have to get a corporate job just to kind of pay the mortgage. And, I just don't think that promotes a society where people can have the right balance in their own personal lives. And the best innovations literally come from just random brainstorms that individual people have. It doesn't necessarily come from billions of dollars of R&D. So, I like a society where our cost of living is such that people can pursue these hobbies, can pursue these brainstorms that, the average person would think is crazy, but this is where we come up with new ideas. So I like a low cost of living. I like the ability for people to be able to engage in the economy in their own way and be able to innovate and come up with new ideas. So that's sort of my ideal. So that environment is an environment that's low in taxation, that's low in red tape, low in if the government says you have to believe this, you have to believe that, that prevents people from thinking about things in a new way. So open, free societies, transparent societies, societies where the government is good at keeping law and order, but isn't necessarily there to solve every problem under the sun. That's where you and I come into place. The more problems that government tries to solve, the more freedoms that get taken from us. And so I believe that human ingenuity can go a long way in terms of dealing with the issues that we have in society, and the government should be conscious of the fact that it can't do everything, and that it needs to give freedom to people to come up with their own ideas and innovate and work towards fixing the problems that face us in the 21st century.
Now, I'd like to address the fact that you are a social conservative, unabashedly so. And if elected leader of the Conservatives, you have said that you'd reopen debates over abortion and same sex marriage. Would you personally vote for a bill banning abortion or same sex marriage?
So I never actually said I would open the debate on same-sex
Hmm.
marriage. I have been clear on opening the debate on abortion. As far as same-sex marriage is concerned, conservative politicians, I believe in free votes in Parliament, and if they want to bring bills of that nature forward, they can. I don't know if that would happen. It would happen. As far as I'm concerned, abortion is an issue that is really open for discussion.
Hmm.
The gay marriage issue, we actually did have a parliamentary discussion on that issue. Abortion, we haven't. We had the Supreme Court struck down laws. 1988, we had a decision, and we had a bill that Brian Mulroney was the prime minister at that time. We had a bill come forward that was too strict for some people, not strict enough for others, and it didn't pass. And no leader has touched the subject since.
Hmm.
And what I'm saying is, look, we need to have a discussion on this. We're the only developed country, almost the only country in the world that has no laws on abortion at all. We can talk about abortion itself. We can talk about things like promoting adoption. We can talk about there's many aspects that deal. We can talk about ultrasounds and information that
Hmm.
given to women. There's many aspects of dealing with abortion. But the idea that there's nothing to see here is just not true. I mean, many other countries in Europe and the United States have gone through the process, have laws that relate to the status of the fetus. And we don't have any laws on that subject whatsoever. And it's a legal vacuum that creates a lot of problems.
Hmm. Now, your social conservatism stems from the fact that you're a practicing Christian. I mean, I'm a practicing Christian too. I'm an Orthodox Christian. In fact, you got into law, you've said in previous interviews, because you were interested in defending religious liberties against the onslaught of political correctness. You even worked on the Trinity Western law case, defending the university's ability to govern itself as it sees fit, congruent with its own religious values. However, from the point of view of optics and evangelism, are you worried that bringing your religious beliefs into politics will make people think that Christians are litigious and dogmatic?
Well, I don't believe that Christians should have to, quote unquote, separate. There is no way to separate beliefs. And what
Hmm.
people don't realize is that everybody has religious beliefs, whether they realize it or not.
Hmm.
Religious beliefs I define as being beliefs that talk about the big questions. Why are we here? Where do we come from? What's the purpose of life? These are questions that even if people don't actually think about them, they're thinking about them subconsciously. They live their life according to their basic understanding of why we're here. So it's impossible for it's impossible for anybody to operate in a vacuum. And we all have ideas based on values. What values are appropriate to us? It could be based on what's the greatest good for the greatest number. It could be what's good for Canada, what's good for me. I mean, we all live our lives according to a code of ethics, whether we realize it could just be whatever I feel like. I mean,
Hmm.
everyone operates according to their to a code, and it's impossible to say, well, you have to leave your code at the door, because even if you left your code at the door, then you'd be operating according to some other code. So the idea that faith and politics have to be split is disingenuous, because everybody has ideas about the greater issues in life, the bigger questions, and to come to the table with a values background is actually an asset. And I believe that people, personally myself, I know that I hold myself to a higher conduct of honesty, a higher conduct of integrity. Whether the public knows or is watching or not, I believe that I'm accountable to God for my honesty and my faithfulness. And so
Hmm.
I don't believe that I should just do whatever I feel like, or I don't believe that I want to do the right thing unless someone's watching. If someone's not watching, then I'll just do whatever I want. I believe in integrity in the good times, in the bad times, when people are watching and when people are not watching.
Great. So there is a connection, I agree, between a person's moral beliefs and their political beliefs. Now, you've said that you are in favor of expanding free speech in Canada, and that is something I applaud. I think that's a great thing. However, I wonder what kind of limits you would put on speech. For example, do you think that we should have free pornography, right? Just open ability to access pornography on the internet?
Yeah. So there's always been legal limits to certain forms of expression in certain
Hmm.
places. So I mean, we have libel laws, we have slander laws, we have public disturbance laws, we have municipal bylaws that deal with noise disturbances and noise violations. So and we have obscenity laws as well. So I'm not against any of those kinds of laws. What I am against is laws that politicize speech and make certain
Hmm.
political declarations illegal and make arguments in and of themselves illegal. So if we're talking about, for example, the concept of hate speech,
Hmm.
which in all honesty, our courts have tried to treat that subject fairly, but it's a subject that by nature is very difficult to define.
Hmm.
And
That is
um,
true.
I mean, if we're talking about, we already had many laws on the books that deal with, like for instance, I think it would be hard for me to say something. I mean, if you think about it, we have laws against uttering threats, we have laws against intimidation, we have laws against assault, we have laws against threatening. We have laws against threatening to assault or batter somebody. So we have a variety of laws that deal with many sort of issues that are conflated with hate speech. And I don't believe that someone who simply has an opinion on a certain subject should be punished for that. Now, if someone is inciting violence, literally saying, "Hey, I think we should engage in violence against a particular group," there's laws for stuff like that. But when it comes to talking about opinions about gender identity or opinions about
Hmm.
gender expression, opinions about what religions are correct, which religions are incorrect. I mean, we live in a society where we don't all agree on everything. And it's entirely fair to have, to critique other political views, other religious views, other scientific views. I mean, a free country depends on free debate. And I
Hmm.
don't like the climate of political correction that we're seeing here.
So let's talk about one aspect of political correctness. And this is something that was a controversial statement you made about Theresa Tam, Canada's public health officer. In response to her incompetent handling of the coronavirus, you asked whether she was working for Canada or for China. The media pounced on your statement and they called it a racist attack. I personally didn't read it as racist, but rather as a query into whether she has sympathies for the Chinese Communist Party. However, I wonder, is it really wise to ascribe motives to her actions? Ostensibly, this is someone you'd have to work with in the future as Conservative Party leader or as Prime Minister.
Yeah, so I don't know Dr. Tam's motives. My
Hmm.
point in that communication was to show the tie between the World Health Organization and China, and
Hmm.
also to show the fact that Dr. Tam is a World Health Organization insider.
Right.
So she's kind of connected to that system, and by extension, sort of is connected to the Communist Party of China. Now, I don't
Hmm.
literally believe that she's on the payroll of China. I was trying to show that she was complicit, whether knowingly or unknowingly, in believing China's basic lies in terms of, when they were trying to cover up the virus and were claiming that it wasn't transmissible human to human and all these types of things. So I don't know Dr. Tam's motives. And in fact, she could have been, honestly ignorant about these things. But there was a lot of, I mean, Taiwan, for example, was raising warning bells
Hmm.
early on. And, whatever her motives, when you're at that level and you're making those decisions, you have to be accountable for them. And I did not feel that she was making the right decisions for Canada. And in a pandemic, you have to replace, if someone's making those kind of mistakes, you have to replace them.
So let's talk about foreign policy. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, poses a real and present danger to the international world order, and it poses a danger to democracy. You look at the protests in Hong Kong, you look at what they're doing in sub-Saharan Africa and Sri Lanka. How would you, if you become a prime minister with a strong majority, let's say, how would you deal with China?
Well, we have to work in coordination with our allies. So the United States is obviously a great option. I'm looking at various options. I mean, we have to take a look at Chinese communist influence in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, if you just Google that phrase, you'll see several reports that have been received through CSIS, through Freedom of Information requests, that outline their concerns about Chinese communist influence in Canada. So there's a variety of ways to address that. We need to put more money into, investigating these leads that CSIS has raised. There's also Huawei. I don't believe that Huawei should have any part in a 5G network.
Mm-hmm.
They're involved in surveillance in China on their own citizens. We should not allow that here. They obviously have an issue with stealing intellectual property. So we need to be very careful with the access that China may have to our corporate secrets. Chinese state-owned enterprises or those with close links to the Communist Party buying companies in Canada. We need to have very strict rules when it comes to that. When we take a look at Chinese foreign students, Donald Trump has issued a directive that those students that have been affiliated with military schools in China are no longer going to be allowed in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are good ideas. This is nothing against Chinese people. In fact, I know many of them. I have many volunteers on my campaign that are very concerned with what Beijing is doing. But we have to make sure that we protect our intellectual property. We have to make sure that we protect the integrity of Canada. And I'm looking even at tariffs on Chinese goods. I want to make sure that our manufacturing sector can be strong in Canada, that we don't have to depend on China for our personal protective equipment. So I'm looking at all alternatives on the table, but we need to have a strong response.
Okay, so let's turn to another foreign policy issue besides China. In February, you tweeted that moving the Canadian embassy in Israel to Jerusalem is official Canadian Conservative Party policy, CPC policy. It's also the right thing to do, you said, since Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel. Now, that doesn't really seem like a compelling reason from a foreign policy perspective. How does moving Canada's embassy to Jerusalem serve Canada's foreign policy interests?
Well, I think sometimes it's about the right thing to do. And, Israel is the only country in the world that doesn't get to choose its own capital. I mean, can you imagine, how would you feel if we told China our capital's Ottawa? They're like, no, it's not, it's Hamilton. We'd be like, well, who are you to tell me what my capital is? And then they want to have their diplomatic, retinue in Hamilton. I think we should allow sovereign nations to make their own decisions when it comes to what their capital should be. Yes, when you look at sort of, when you're looking at land claims, when you're looking at, for instance, Indigenous land claims in Canada, you take a look at, what type of usage has occurred? How long has this usage occurred? And we do have, of course, great historical precedent for, Jewish use of Jerusalem, right? I mean, it certainly, if we go back in the ages, there isn't any modern example of any modern people that can connect themselves to an ancestral homeland from 4,000 years ago. That's something that is unique to Israel and Jews. Of course it's going to upset some people, but Israel is an important Middle Eastern ally. A lot of people, a lot of the surrounding nations over there don't want Israel to exist, period. And no matter what Israel does, they're not going to be happy. And I think it's okay to stand up for our allies, and that's something that's important to me.
Let's talk about land claims in Canada itself. Your campaign is opposed to Canada having adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UNDRIP. This declaration states that Indigenous peoples around the world should be free from racist discrimination, should not be forcibly removed from their lands, and generally affirms Native sovereignty. What is wrong with these goals, and what is wrong with the UNDRIP?
I'm certainly not in favor of racism or, in favor of treating Indigenous people poorly. The issue here is that, of course, Canada already has a variety of protections and constitutional sort of provisions that deal with Indigenous. And the concern with the UN DRIP, and again, the UN DRIP was a general sort of statement of intent that many countries signed on to, many of which had no legal protections for Indigenous people at all in their countries. And the issue that we have here is we already have an issue where a small number of protesters can sort of prevent the greater will of Indigenous communities from getting their way on issues of economic importance. So in the Coastal GasLink pipeline, we saw all the elected band councils along the route of that pipeline. They were in favor of that project. And frankly, because they knew that it was going to bring lots of good jobs, high-paying jobs, and revenues to their communities. A small group of protesters, some of which were Indigenous, many of which were sort of tag-along protesters from random environmental groups, were able to shut down this project for quite some time. We don't want sort of a perpetual veto, which is what some people have raised as concerns when it comes to the UN DRIP. So we want to make sure that the Indigenous communities in Canada have a way to move forward on some of the things that they'd like to do in their own communities. And my concern is that, a document like this and trying to enact this into law would provide, instead of greater clarity, more confusion about, how we get these types of projects done, how we complete these types of projects, how we provide economic benefits to our Indigenous communities. So, the language and the wording sounds great, but when we take a look at our situation here in Canada, we have to make sure that we do what's fair for Canadians, for Indigenous people, and not put in place a law that adds more confusion as opposed to clarity. And I know there's different views on that, but in my view, we already have too much confusion when it comes to land claims and Indigenous use of land, and we need to make sure that we can not just say no to things, but also show the Indigenous people how to say yes. And that is what I think has been lacking in our.
Would you get rid of the Indian Act, or would you think about doing that?
I don't have any particular plans in that regard. I think that we certainly have to do more with our Indigenous communities. And for me, I'm prioritizing economic independence for our Native groups here. I'm also prioritizing transparency and openness. You'll recall that Stephen Harper put through a law that required transparency in terms of where some of this funding was being used for. He was called racist or whatever for doing that. But the thing is that we need to make sure that the money is going and being spent to benefit the most number of people on these reserves. We have to prioritize clean drinking water. There's many things that we need to do, but I haven't. There's nothing in my plan about repealing the Indian Act per se.
All right. So immigration, let's turn to immigration. Immigration is a great source of pride for Canada. We are an open and welcoming country. We have lots of immigrants. However, recent waves of immigration have seemed to be unsustainable. They've led to unaffordable housing prices in major cities. They've led to congestion and a strain on public resources. You have said that you would like to reduce immigration from 350,000 per year to 150,000 per year. Why 150 and not lower?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And the number was chosen because to bring us in line with sort of developed world norms when it comes to immigration, which is generally about 0.5% per year. So that was sort of the aim of that policy. The point is, yes, we need to bring it into a level that's sustainable, that allows our housing market to provide fair housing for people who live here. So that's the number that we're going with. Obviously, we can see how it goes and we can adjust as time goes on, but that's where we got that number from. It's roughly 0.5% of our population, and it brings us in line with other immigration rates around the world.
All right. So this is the most important question, and it's one that could lose you a lot of votes. What is your favorite NHL team?
Well, I grew up in the era of Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr
Oh no.
on the Pittsburgh
Okay.
Penguins. So
All right.
I have a soft spot for the Penguins in my heart. But being a proud Ontarioan, obviously, I am very happy when the Leafs win as well. So I do. Mario Lemieux was always my favorite hockey player, and so I have a soft spot for the Penguins in my heart. But in being in Ontario, I'm definitely a Leafs fan as well.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much, Derek. It's been great to talk with you, and best of luck with the campaign.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.